Okay, I just watched the newest episode of My Adventures with Superman. I think it's episode 8, and for some reason they're trying to like do this weird genre shift, and they're trying to make it dark, and they're trying to make it meaningful. They're trying to make Superman question his superheroism. They're emphasizing that like, ooh, Superman could be bad, and maybe people have a reason to be scared of him. Like even though he's a good, pure-hearted person in this continuity, like, ooh, society might turn him evil. Ooh, there may be forces out to get him. Ooh, it's like it's such a whiplash from the work from the rest of the show. I really have to wonder just who wrote this. Like, did they have a different writing team? Like, what is with like the sudden change in tone? Like, it honestly, like, this is probably my favorite episode so far. Like looking back on it, like everything else I've seen up to this point just had like one or two like good scenes, like usually with like Lois and Clark interacting. Like the plots were asinine, the characters were boring, like the reveals were not interesting. Like some of the decisions they made, especially with like the character designs, were typically pretty off. Like this was like not all that well produced of a show. But for some reason, they really stepped up their game with this one. They really made it feel as if the characters actually are going through some like real personal problems. Like Lois and Clark have like gotten over their first big fight, and they're interacting, like they're in these situations where like they're becoming more involved with like the Superman identity, specifically like the problems that Clark faces in being Superman, specifically the feeling that like he isn't a normal person, that like people don't understand that he is a pure guy who wants to do right by the world and like use his powers for good, right? Like everyone else like does not understand Superman, right? That seems to be like a theme with the show or with the episode so far, is that like, the antagonist and Vicky Vale, like they really, really think that Superman cannot be who he says he is. Like they think it's some kind of trick, that there's some like under underlying reason for what he's doing, and they suspect it's like something sinister. They suspect like there's something wrong with him. They suspect that something is up, and it's actually a really interesting angle to go with, in that like we're seeing a Superman being kind of getting like the Marvel superhero treatment, where like people are skeptical of his actions and think there's like something wrong with allowing this guy to go around and do whatever he wants, right? Like it is, I think, like in a lot of ways, an interesting angle to take for the character, especially because he's not actually malicious in this continuity, right? At least not yet, right? That is the implication here, is that like he is doing good things. Like everyone who interacts with him has nothing but like positive things to say about him. But like there are situations he gets into where like he does look bad. Like people do come away sometimes thinking that like maybe he did the wrong thing, or like fought the wrong people, or like used his powers like in an ill-advised way, right? Right? There are people who don't like Superman, and there are times where like sometimes it comes off as if it like might be warranted, maybe. And I kind of like that about it. Like I really like the idea that like they're going with this idea that maybe Clark is might go off the deep end, and it's kind of Lois that keeps him grounded and keeps him like on track to like be who he truly is at his core, right? As opposed to like letting these negative things get him down and like influences actions in negative ways. Like I really like that. It just comes off as if like it's a lot more nuanced than I gave it credit for. Or well, okay. Here's the thing, though. Like, here's the thing. Like, things have happened in the past couple of episodes, like all season long, but like none of it really feels as if it's been building up to this moment, right? You had that last episode with like the League of Lois Lanes, which is like the stupidest concept I've ever seen in my life. It's a team of like Lois Lanes who come together to like kill like evil Superman and stuff like that. They're already introducing like multiverse stuff like this early on in the series. um, you know, they harass Lois. They try to deal with Superman. Like it's dumb, right? Like it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It's not charming. It's not like it just doesn't work very well, right? And then we go into this where it's just like back to the where it's this like darker thing, and it's just such a weird whiplash. Like I think that's a real problem the show has, where like it just cannot. decide on whether it wants to be like a romance show or an action show or like a deep analytical look at like Superman's character or like Lois's relationship with him. Like it just seems like it's all over the place and not in a really good, not in a good way, right? Like it just feels like the writers have the occasional good idea that they have to surround with like whatever they can to like make it work, right? Like they have to do this thing where like Lois like realizes that Superman might be evil. Oh, we'll have these multiverse Lois Lanes come in and like explain the concept, you know? It just seems kind of contrived. So instead of like naturally like realizing that like what Superman does might not actually be what's best for society, or that he might actually be a threat to people, you know, without even really meaning to. Like instead, it's this thing where like, oh, in other universes he turns out bad for reasons, right? It is just like it just seems like not all that well thought out and not all that well put together. And I think like this episode, is probably the most focused out of all of them because it feels like it actually has like a specific thing that it wants to say, and I think it does so reasonably well. I think there's not really all that wrong with the message and like everything, but again, it has like the same problems that like the rest of the season has with like the animation and the character designs and like the voice acting and like some of the decisions they make. Like it just feels like even if you have a good episode in a show like this, like why would you ever watch this much? You know, like this is the problem with the show in general is that like if you watch like the first episode, like even out of morbid curiosity, like you wouldn't come back and like watch more of it unless you were like me and were just like, oh, I'm gonna critique this show just because I hate myself and I just have nothing else to do with my time. Like it feels like it feels like the show is like a disaster, like ratings wise. A lot of people are shilling it from like the woke angle, like for woke reasons, but like when you actually look at it objectively, it feels like the show is a complete and total bomb. Like nobody's talking about it. It's not being promoted all that much. Like even this big like shocking episode is not really lighting the world on fire. It's just like a subpar Superman show that might have some like good elements to it when it comes to like the romance and like the pacing and some of like the characterization things. Because it has been observed that like for all this show's faults, it doesn't make the critical mistake that like everyone else wants to make. In that like it feels like it has to make Superman evil to create drama. And I think it's a big reason why I kind of watch this because much like the Quinn show, which also has a ton of problems, like at the very least, it feels like the writers are trying to do something different. They're trying to do something original. They're trying to like innovate on these ideas and these characters and do stuff that like nobody else has really done before. Like utilizing Vicky Vale, you know, from the Batman series, like from the Batman universe, the Batman side of things as being this like this reporter who's like super critical of Superman. Like that actually makes a whole lot of sense considering her background and her interactions with Batman and stuff like that. It really gives you this idea that there might be like something there in regards to like Batman who hasn't really been mentioned yet, and like her relationship with him, and like you know like her personality is so much more like domineering than Lois is. Like she's a way more experienced reporter in this continuity, which I'm sure is not the case in like mainline canon, but like it is something different, you know, like much like Lois's change in general, like you being like a fledgling reporter, like trying to make it, like it it makes sense. Like the concept does have some value, right? Like the problem is like the execution. The problem is the pacing. The problem is the animation. The problem is like the production in general. But like when it comes to this idea of like Lois and Clark like falling in love with each other, like genuinely, like overcoming their problems, like having fights and stuff like that, like it actually feels like there is something there. And it's such a shame to like come away from this and think that like yeah they took this like really cool idea like this general core strong idea and just botched it so badly. You know, because I don't think any serious Superman fan is really going to be into this show, right? There are so many better alternatives. You know, like I actually put on like the animated series. I watched like a good chunk of that. Like it's so much like I've been critical of Lois Lane in the past as a character, but like watching that cartoon. like a little bit. I really started to like her, in that version. Like you know, very she's a very interesting character in that one, right? Like I like the dynamic there between her and Clark. I like the storylines and what they do. Like I like a lot of what happens in that show. Like, everything is well presented. Like the animation is good. Like the character designs are good. Like the jokes are good. Like the action is good for the most part. Like the plot lines make sense. Like they have lots of interesting characters. Here, like it just feels like the only characters that anyone cares about are Lois and Clark, or like characters that are like that seem to like exist to revolve around them. They don't really seem like they have lives or personalities of their own, or like goals or aspirations, or worries and concerns. Like the entire thing is about like Lois and Clark's relationship. Like nothing else really matters at its core. And I think that's not the way you should probably write a show like this. Like I think there should be like a lot more nuance to these characters. There should be a lot more depth to them. There should be a lot more like drama, like conflict. There should be like a lot more going on. It just always feels super shallow compared to like the 90s version. Like I just watched that episode where like Green Lantern is introduced, right? Like I'm not sure if this is the first time Green Lantern appeared in the DCAU, like and like he gets the powers and they fight Sinestro, and like Superman like supports this new superhero. Like he's like giving him advice on like how to get started, and like like giving him advice, like telling him that he can be a hero and stuff like that. Like really really cool stuff, right? you know I'm not sure if the character appears again, but like watching that, it really made me invested in Green Lantern. It almost wanted me to check out like more Green Lantern stuff. But like I never feel that way about the characters in My Adventures with Superman. The characters here are so dis different from how they're portrayed like traditionally, that it's very hard to be invested in any of them other than Lois and Clark, right? Which I do think, I think their personality shifts do work quite a lot, especially in the case of Clark. Um, it does feel different. It does feel unique. It does feel distinct. But does that make it good? And like the answer is no. Like you can like do creative things with these characters. You can be original. You can come out with unique ideas and storylines and a focus on like the romance aspect. You can avoid the mistakes that everyone else is making with these characters, but like at the end of the day, like if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And nothing I've seen from My Adventures with Superman like makes me think this show is ever going to be successful, that it's ever going to come together, that it's ever going to mean anything, that it's going to be anything more than just like an an obscure piece of Superman media. Like there is nothing here that is really that hasn't been done better by other Superman properties, Superman media.